Okay, well, thank you everybody for joining us today. We've got another new gateway that we're introducing. This one is the UG-205-PLUS, which is our newest edition, and Tom will go through all the specific details here for you in just a moment. But as we go through the webinar, if you do have any questions, please feel free to put those in the Q&A section. If that is not working for you, then you can go ahead and use the chat feature, but I'll get to the questions at the end. And again, thank you for taking a few minutes to join us. And when we are done, we will be sending the link out to everybody so you can take a look at it if you do have to leave early. So with that, I will turn it over to Tom and let him take over.
Most excellent. All right. Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us. Let's see, it's another quarter, another gateway. We seem to be introducing quite a few new products these days. And so this is the latest. Let's see. So in this webinar, what I'll try to do is just go through what the reason was for introducing the gateway, have some specifics about the gateway itself, a little comparison to our existing mid-range gateway, and then it's always useful to see where this gateway fits in the grand scheme of things. And then after that, we'll throw it open to questions. Okay, so, well, this is yet another gateway. So why another gateway? This happens to be in the mid-range of our gateway series. So far, our mid-range has been the UG-101 and the 102. Those are basically identical gateways, just from two different manufacturers. But this is our, what we call the workhorse, but it's now about 3 years old, and technology does move on. And so we have been using, for the UG-200 series, a much faster CPU. So what we then decided to do was take that same CPU and put it into a mid-range in the 200 series. And so this, of course, provides more throughput, more VPN users, all kinds of stuff up. And so we've also noticed that our gateways are starting to move up into the higher employee counts. So the UG-101, for example, was, I think the largest I've seen it being used to support was an office with 125 employees on a daily basis. And that was definitely about 25% more than what we had, in fact, designed it for. But they didn't want to move up to the 206 quite yet, because it was still a pretty small office, relatively speaking. And so they wanted a mid-range. So the UG-205 would have been very good for that. So the 206 and the 207 can most definitely support like 200, 250 employees. But for something in the smaller offices with a little more performance than the UG-101, that's where the 205 would come in. Another thing everyone on this call will probably have noticed is that, supply chain issues didn't just go away when COVID receded. They're still around. And so if you talk to different vendors, you'll find different lead times. So far, thank goodness, knock on wood, etc., we have been able to avoid most of those supply chain issues by keeping stock on hand and doing fancy footwork. But it is always better to have another option available for the different gateways that allows us to make use of different supply chains, so that we never have to tell people they can't get or they can't support their customers. And so the 205 comes from a different hardware vendor, and so it uses different chipsets. And as a consequence, if we have a problem building the 101, for example, we can build the 205 and vice versa. So when you're in the land of supply chain issues, you tend to have to do innovative stuff. And finally, we started to see a lot of higher speed Ethernet links drift into the smaller businesses. So for instance, the new Wi-Fi 7, and in fact, some of the Wi-Fi 6 EAPs are starting to move to 2.5 and 5 gigabit Ethernet links. And in fact, some of them, there's even one that I just saw that has actually got 10 gigabit Ethernet links on it. So the link speeds are definitely moving upwards. And we even see ISP starting to roll out 2 gig fiber connections to homes and businesses for smaller offices. So the writing is clearly on the wall, and so we are also taking the first few steps in that direction. So with that, this is the 205, we call it the 205-PLUS. So it's a new mid-range, and it's basically just as compact as the 101, but it has 6 ports, 2.5 gigabit Ethernet ports across the board. And it's got all the standard up-level firmware and features. So everything that runs on the 101 will run on the 205. In fact, that is true of just about every one of our gateways. Everything that you can do on a gateway, you can do on the next one down and the next one up. And that's done on purpose to make it easy to for our partners to move up or move down as the customer needs change. I think the sole exception is our Soho gateway, which has no storage in it, but it's just way too small, and the use case didn't justify storage. But for everything else, there's you can use the storage, there's Ethernet ports, there's firewall, there's VPN, there's Active Directory, the whole 9 yards. So this is no different. It has all the standard features and functions, and it also works seamlessly with the rest of the product family. So you can install a 205 at one office, 101 at a different office, 206 at a third office, and not actually care at all. And of course, that means it shows up on the dashboard just like any other one of our gateways, and it has the usual dual WAN ports and Ethernet ports, and you can assign all the VLANs and everything as required. So it's essentially functioning in a compact rack-mountable form factor for mid-sized offices in between the 204 and the 206, and in fact, in between the 101 and the 206. Here's some details on the specifications. We do have a data sheet on it, so you can take a look at that. But this gives you a quick view of all the different characteristics. There are 6 ports on this box, and all 6 are 2.5 gig Ethernet. And so they auto-negotiate to 10, 100, 1000, and 2.5 gig Ethernet. And so you can plug any kind of device at the far end, up to and including 2.5, and it will talk to the device. As with all the gateways, there's no PoE on the box. It's always prohibitively expensive to try and get PoE onto the same setup as a gateway, thanks to UL, what we call the UL tax. But for that reason, we supply PoE injectors, of course. However, there are 4 LAN ports and 2 WAN ports. Again, same philosophy as the rest of the gateways. The WAN ports can be used for either failover, or you can combine them and get basically load balance across the 2, so you can take 2 ISP links and combine them to make them one fat pipe. The throughput is pretty decent in terms of firewall, IDS, IPS, and VPN. It's definitely, I have another slide coming up that shows you a comparison to the 101, but it is definitely quite a step up over the 101. And the intent was that there's a lot of symmetric fiber going into places around the country, so this can max out a symmetric fiber connection. And of course, we rate it to about 120 users per site. As with all the gateways, there's no hard limit. I mean, you can, it's not like it just sort of stops working when you put in 121 users, but we just advise that you don't put more than that, just because at that point, you are probably going to run into some slowness issues, performance issues, or whatever. But essentially, we expect that it can support 120 users per site quite comfortably. And of course, different scenarios may have different requirements. So give us a call if you ever have a question about the capacity of the gateway, and we can most definitely easily advise you as to which one would fit a particular situation better. In terms of storage, this is a pretty compact little box, and it's got room for a single terabyte SSD. So we have the storage option on this is basically one. It's a 1 terabyte SATA 3 SSD mounted inside the box. In terms of dimensions, it's actually pretty close to the 101 in terms of width. It's a little deeper and then the 101 in terms of depth, but it's 1U rack mount and it's about a foot wide. So it fits nicely on either a tabletop or in a rack. So, and of course, we will supply the rack mount ears to go with the box. Okay. So this being our new, you could call it a somewhat higher end mid-range. It's useful to compare it to the 101, which we, by the way, will still be providing the 101, and we'll keep it in, feature it on our price list and everything, and it's part of the lineup, but it's essentially, you could call it the 101 plus. Well, that's probably why it's called the UG-205-PLUS. So in the case of the 101 actually has more LAN ports and with 3 more LAN ports than the 205. So if you can avoid extra switches if you use the 101, whereas the 205 already has 4 LAN ports. So you're probably looking at a small 8-port switch if you wanted to fill out the Ethernet ports. The 101 also has more storage options in terms of a larger storage capacity, but it does have a lower performance than the 205, fairly substantial. I mean, this is definitely the impact of the newer CPUs that are being used in the 205. The network processor in the 205 is quite a step up from that in the 101. So we typically recommend the 101 for smaller offices now, because there is now a 205 option. But if you have a larger office, then a 205 is a good choice. And so it's, I mean, I would say it would be on a case-by-case basis. So you have to balance the cost versus performance trade-off. If you have a full 1 gig ISP link, then I would say going forward, probably a 205 is a good bet to max out that link. All right, so I think every time we have one of these presentations, this slide gets more and more dense. We now have quite a lineup of gateways to choose from. So it's all the way from the 204, which is 4 inches by 4 inches and fits in the palm of your hand, to the 208, which requires, as I say, 3 men and a boy to put into a rack. And so it goes all the way from less than 25 users or 20 users for the 204 up to 1,000 users on the 208. And everything in between now can be supported with a gateway or two. So if you want 10 gig, we've got a gateway for that. If you need a 100-person office, we've got a gateway for that. Support a church with 200 parishioners, got a gateway for that. So we more or less have filled out the gateway line. I'm not sure that there's much more in terms of filling out the line, as much as adding more, say, higher speed ports or more move to the system coming up forward. But for sure, we now can cover the whole range of applications we've seen coming out of the button base. All right, so to wrap up, this is a nice short and sweet webinar. It's only one product that we're introducing. So to wrap up, we have expanded the hardware platform yet again, and the whole idea being that we can now, we can offer you a menu of choices, so you can actually pick the right gateway for the customer needs. But again, remember, this is entirely on a subscription basis. So if your customer outgrows gateway 1 or customer shrinks and doesn't need gateway 1, you have gateway 2. Just send back gateway 1 and replace with gateway 2. The 205 should be able to handle it does have higher performance, can do things like fiber ISP links, potentially support even 2 gig ISP links that we see coming up on the horizon. So if you have a proposal or layout and stuff, send us a call, give us a call, send us an email. We'll be happy to help. Okay, so with that, I will turn it back to Cory for questions.
Right. Got a couple of them here. So does it include rack mount brackets, or how are we handling those?
Yes, it does. So in all cases, things that are rack mountable will have rack mount brackets. I think the only thing that's not rack mountable are a tiny little 204 and the tiny little 8-port switch that we just recently introduced to the last version.
Okay. And then when are we going to be releasing pricing on the 205?
That's a good question. So I think, honestly, that would be more of a Cory question, but I'll give it a stab. So basically, we have some tentative pricing already settled internally. We're just circling that around with our manufacturer and all that, make sure that it all makes sense. And then we should be releasing pricing. For sure, it'll be before the 205 goes into production. So I would say in the next less than 3 to 4 weeks, maybe 2 to 3 weeks.
Okay. And then I guess that would be the next question is, when will the 205 be available to ship?
That's $1 million question. So yes, according to the R&D schedule, the 205 shipped last August on I believe it was the 15th of August. But unfortunately, whenever there's engineering in the mix, there are these nasty little things called bugs. And so we're still stamping out a few minor little firmware bugs here and there, and making sure that it works across the board, and you can plug anything into the 205 and it'll just work. So in that whole process, we've been delayed. So I think to cut a long story short, it will be most definitely before the end of September. Otherwise, my tail is going to get fried. But sometime in the next couple of weeks is my guess. Any day now. Basically, everything is done except for stamping out some firmware bugs.
Okay. So Robert asked, moving up gateways, are the current customer settings copied over? Does the copy over break anything like a VPN or anything when we upgrade?
That is in fact one of the reasons why we are diligently stamping out firmware bugs, is because one of the requirements is that you should be able to slide out a 101 or a 204 or anything else and slide in a 205, and it should just seamlessly work. And so in that testing process, we find issues and we fix them. But yes, the intent is that you should be able to remove any gateway and plug in a different gateway, and we will move the config over seamlessly.
Okay. And then it looks like we might have had a typo. I think we named it the 205-PLUS and then maybe referred to it as a 205 Pro. That would have been a typo, Kurt. The Pro is actually the 206 model, the 205 Plus. So the 206 Pro is just one of our high performance gateways. It's a step up in terms of size and capacity. So hopefully that answers your question. Next question is, are we going to be discontinuing the 101?
No, we're basically continuing the 101 for those applications that don't need the performance of the 205, but would like to have 3 extra Ethernet ports so they can avoid a switch, And besides, the 101 is a nice little box. It seems to fit in a lot of cases.
And then
again, all that is subject to supply chain issues. We can't really predict what's going to happen towards the end of the year, because if the chipset's not available, then basically it's like it's 205 time.
Looks like the last question I've got is, will we be introducing APs with 2.5 gigabit?
A very good question. So I think the short answer is yes, in the future. The long answer is there are very few of them out there at the moment that we have qualified and checked out. They're all mostly 4x4 MIMO APs, and when we took a look at them, they're like, these are really a little too much for the small office environment. 2x2 MIMO AP with more APs is better than having a single 4x4 MIMO AP sitting in the middle of the office, contending with one RF channel. So, but that being said, the Wi-Fi 6E standard and the Wi-Fi 7 standards, those actually can cram in quite a bit more bandwidth into the same RF channel. So at that point, 2.5 gig Ethernet starts making sense. And so at that point also, we will start introducing 2.5 gig Ethernet APs into the lineup.
Okay. Any other questions from anybody in attendance before we wrap up? Thank you, Chuck and Glenn, for Glenn's comment on our two-factor authentication. I guess we got that little issue resolved, so he's happy about that. Thank you, Charles, for attending, or Chuck. And I guess that's about it for today. We will be posting this link, and I'll be sending it out here probably next week after we get it wrapped up. But thank you again for taking time out of your day to see the presentation, and look forward to talking to everybody very soon.
Great. Thank you all. Short and sweet.
Thank you. Have a good day, everybody.